I'm not a person who buys souvenirs, but if I bring something home from a trip, it's most likely a paper bill of the local currency. I think it is just very interesting to see what different countries decide to put on there. If we take a look at the Costa Rican colones, for example, the pictures on there look definitely more photorealistic. And the Mexican pesos, they have some pencil sketch drawings on there. But the Faroe Islands, yeah, these are my favorites. They have some watercolor paintings on there, which looks pretty nice, I think. So this is my kind of souvenir, what I bring when I come from a different country. Anyway, the title of this video is actually a metaphor about the main point of this video, but I'm not going to tell you how I mean it. Maybe you can come up with it yourself. However, my trip indeed started with the Northern Lights, and I honestly didn't expect that at all. Planning my trip to Mexico made me come up with many things in my head, but not the Northern Lights. As you may have already guessed, the Northern Lights appeared during my flight to Mexico while passing Greenland. At first I was just wondering why the clouds were looking so bright at night, but when the clouds started to move and turn into a greenish color, my sleepy brain realized that it was actually the Northern Lights. This surprising light show was the first unexpected occurrence of my trip, and definitely one of the good ones. And this is basically how my trip started. Right now I just want to give you a little preview about Mexico and what you can expect to see in the close future. I'm already scanning the film from Mexico right now, and without having any clue of how these shots turned out, I can already promise you that the results from Mexico will be outstanding, because I already finished editing the first series of my aerial photography project from Mexico, which was also why I went to Mexico in the first place. In addition, there will be at least 2 other aerial photography series from Mexico, 6 rolls of black and white film photography straight from the Mexican desert, and of course some silent photography series as well. I really can't wait to share this with you, especially the aerial photography project, because making this happen was the most challenging photography project, speaking about planning, organization and carrying it out, I have ever pulled off. There was simply so much that could have gone wrong. I'm not gonna go into detail now, but just to name a few things, it started with arguing at every single airport to not let my film pass through the X-ray scanner. 6 times in total. And I don't know if you have experience with that, but it's not fun. There are some people who are not necessarily trying to give you a hard time, but they just don't want to make the manual check, and yeah, it just drains a lot of energy every single time. Tijuana, the city where my trip in Mexico finally started, where I picked up my rental car, is the city with the most murderers per 100,000 citizens in the world. So, not necessarily a place where you want to stay longer than necessary. Another critical point were the Mexican streets, with some, let's say, open-minded driving habits and potholes as deep as volcano craters. I still have no idea how not a single of my tires did burst during this trip, and well, I'm not going to complain, but it is still a surprise. The car I had rented was quite new, but the 3,500 kilometers I went through Mexico were nothing but a torture for the tires. So with other words, I was constantly worried about losing my tires on sharp stones or these pothole craters. Staying safe as a solo traveler in general was a big topic, and especially because there were 3 different parts of criminality in this area. There was the risk of theft, cartel activity, and being robbed by the police. I did a lot of research before I went on this trip, and from what I was reading, cartel activity isn't a big issue in this area. But after some locals, as well as my pilot, told me about recent cartel activity in one specific town, I took their advices seriously and drove a big turnaround. The third one is also something I wasn't completely aware of. I heard about corruption, of course, and that you might have to pay a small fine so they let you continue. But again, locals told me that if you give the police a reason to stop you, they might take you to the police station and you will not see your camera equipment again. I don't know how high the chance is that some of these things really happen. However, if locals tell me about it, and especially if it's not just one person, I just take it seriously and try to avoid it. So despite these things, there are also wild animals. I saw quite a lot of them, and most of them were harmless, but for some animals like rattlesnakes, you should definitely keep your eyes open. Gladly I did, because I had one encounter when a rattlesnake crossed my path while I was returning to my car after a sunset shoot on the rim of a volcano crater. I actually heard the rattling noise before I saw her, which was a bit scary in this very moment, but I just stopped walking and she moved away. Despite the real danger, it was my first time being in the desert, and if you are completely alone in a new environment at night, hearing a bunch of coyotes howling does not necessarily make you feel comfortable, even if they are not a threat to humans. So these were just some things I had to keep track of, not even talking about the photographic challenges and the organization part. There was actually more than one moment where I just questioned all of my decisions and where I was simply asking myself, what am I doing here? I want to name one example just to give you an insight that these pictures you can see at the end are not just a dart throw at the map and some bookings to make. I'm talking about one situation that got me really emotional and where I was basically just asking myself if all the effort I'm putting into it is really worth it at the end. So getting to the location of the private airstrip was an unwanted adventure itself, but after my first flight I came back to my motel to check the pictures from the flight, and I can tell you that I was really disappointed. Disappointment is almost an understatement. I looked through the images. First of all, I couldn't figure out if they were perfectly sharp, and they didn't look exactly as I had planned. And I had planned a lot before this flight. The exact spots, the flight circle to get things perfectly in frame, and much more. As you can imagine, this did wake some insecurities I thought I had left behind, like questioning my skills and my decisions in an unhealthy way. I think every one of you who is or was really passionate about one project and put a lot of work in one single outcome knows how this can feel. I went on with this feeling and tried to make the best out of every single day of photography, but this feeling of not getting exactly what you had planned was still with me until I was finally back in Germany and checked my images on a proper screen. The moment when I saw the images from this trip finally on a proper screen was basically when the rollercoaster of emotions finally skyrocketed. The results did not only match my expectations, it exceeded it by far. Due to the jet lag, this happened at 2 p.m. at night, but honestly I just sat there shaking and laughing because all the pressure and the doubts from this trip just fell off and turned into relief, astonishment and pure happiness. There were shots for the Desert Volcano series where we could only fly by once, so there was one single chance to get the exact framing and angle I had planned. And then you are finally checking it on a big screen and it is exactly like you had planned it. Like 100% the framing you were looking for. Perfect altitude, text sharp. I just felt like, and I still feel like, there is no way I really pulled that off. but it seems like I did. So I just wanted to give you an update, as I already said, but also share my emotions of this trip, because as time passes on, I actually forget about how I felt doing a trip, as some memories and the intensity of emotions are fading over time. You're getting used to the work that brought you to tears the first time you saw it, because at some point you will have seen these pictures hundreds of times. I just want to say that these ups and downs will always be a part of it. And instead of waiting for these moments of doubts to not come back, accept them and see them as a sign that you are on the right track. I know, it's easier said than done, but saying it is the first step. Or something like that. Enough now. Tschüss.